The English were not deterred by the failure at Roanoke, and they decided to try again about 20 years later, and they established Jamestown in Virginia. Now, they were establishing Jamestown for economic reasons, just the same as when they established Roanoke, but instead of turning to piracy and stealing from the Spanish, the English decided by the early 17th century to actually try to find wealth themselves. So they're establishing Jamestown to find gold, to find fur, or to make money through slavery. Now, England doesn't have very realistic expectations of colonization. They have a grand plan with no idea what they're doing. So they settle in Chesapeake Bay, just up the Powhatan River. And here we see actually two maps of the settlement of Jamestown. And you can see the one circle circling the Powhatan River, the mouth of Powhatan River, and the other one circling where Jamestown was supposedly established. The only other map we have which locates the settlement of Jamestown is the small map in the corner, and that's the only depiction of the fort or the establishment of what it was. And you can see that it's a three-sided fort with bulwarks at the corners, and then what looks like a flag is actually a garden. And actually, one of the questions I ask here is, with such clear maps of where Jamestown was supposedly established, why did we only discover the original settlement very recently? For the longest time, we actually couldn't find Jamestown. And if you ever go down to Jamestown, Virginia today, there's actually two sites. There's a museum where we thought Jamestown used to be, when there's absolutely no evidence, but they have reconstructed what that fort would have looked like. And then about 10 miles down the road, you'll see the actual archaeological site, and now there's a museum there, and there's lots more interpretation. So they established this fort, this Jamestown, as a place to make money, as a sort of the starting point of a settlement, so that they can go find gold, so they can go find that sort of untold wealth. The problem is Jamestown turns out to be a death trap of relatively epic proportions. They end up not going as far upriver as they're supposed to. They're told to go many, many miles upriver, and they don't. They actually stay relatively close to the mouth of the river. And this is a problem because the water is actually salty from the ocean rather than clear water. So it's an unhealthy area, it's very swampy, there's a problem with mosquitoes. They have no idea at this point the mosquitoes can carry malaria. They're stagnant waters, but they think it's a great place because there are no Native Americans there. So they say, well, this is a great place to go because there are no Native Americans. Well, there are no Native Americans there because the Native Americans know that this is a terrible place to settle. So they start to develop malaria, typhoid fever, dysentery, because they're just too close to the ocean. They're getting salt water rather than fresh water, and they get salt poisoning. Now, there was 104 colonists that arrived in 1607. 38 survived the first year. That is, 2/3 died. And part of this is because they had two major planning problems. The first was that the company that established Jamestown, the East India Company, wanted colonists who were wealthy, who would bring them money. So they end up having in the first set of colonists some very wealthy people, but not a lot of hard workers. So they have the sort of second sons of gentlemen, of aristocrats. These are men who are not used to working. About a third of the 104 people, and these are all men, 104 men, a third of them, 36 of them, are gentlemen. They're not used to labor, right? And that's a high proportion of aristocrats in Virginia, as opposed to what number of aristocrats there would have been in England at the same time. Now, there are also some servants to these aristocrats. Those servants are also not used to labor. And then the rest are artisans, which is very good once a colony is established. But in the first years, you really need farmers, you need people who are good at basic construction. You really don't need a wig maker, which one of the 104 men was a wig maker. That's really not necessary in Jamestown. You need farmers. The other problem is that of all these people, even if they were willing to work, not many of them know how to work. They don't know how to farm. All they know how to do is go out and fight and shoot and hopefully find gold. So they can't really feed themselves. So what we see here is actually a later map of Virginia, and you can see how the Virginians perceived themselves very much as a settlement lost in the wilderness. And you can see these images of Native Americans that sort of dominate the stage, where they definitely felt as if they were maybe a single point of civilization in a world of uncivilization. Here is a portrayal of the fort, and you have a very large Powhatan, that's the Native American tribe that's in this area, sort of overlooking the fort. So the fort itself is very organized and tight, but there is sort of blooming presence of Native Americans in the area. This is the actual Jamestown fort as we know today, and one of the reasons that we didn't know where the fort was because it was actually underwater. The Powhatan River had moved, and so we had looked at where it would have been based on these maps, not recognizing that the rivers had moved. Once we went back and said, the rivers have moved, the coastlines have changed in the past 400 years, it was a lot easier to find it. So this was found in the early 1990s. Here are some images from the archaeological expedition at Jamestown today. So in this time of sort of epic failure of Jamestown settlement, along comes Captain John Smith. And obviously the image on the left is the real John Smith. The image on the right is the Disney version of John Smith. John Smith was a military man. He had traveled as a mercenary. He had fought Turks and Islam. He had lots of experience. He was a very shrewd man. He was a very strong and harsh leader. He's a self-made man. He's not a gentleman. And he comes and takes control of the colony and establishes martial law to save it. He requires everyone in the colony to spend 4 hours of every day working on the crops. He mandates that all land is communal, there's no private ownership, and he takes an active role with the Native Americans. He makes sure that he tries to make the Native Americans happy to see them. He has a very sort of realistic perception of Native Americans, that they're not just going to roll over and accept their English superiority like any other English believed, but that in fact that they could be negotiated with. Native Americans, the image on the left is a drawing from the time, and the image on the right is from the movie The New World. So these are both portrayals of the Powhatan Native Americans. The Powhatans are a confederacy in the Chesapeake area. They're the sort of largest confederacy of this time. It's a very strong political group. Powhatan is the name of the tribe and the leader. He has authority both politically and religiously. Now, Powhatan, that was the leader at the time of the early 17th century, was also very shrewd, and he had an idea of using his own kinship, his own family, to get the political control over the English. He has many wives and many children, and he's used to marrying children to other village leaders. Right? This is something that European rural lineages do too. Marriages to establish an alliance. And so what he tries to do is he tries to give one of his children to the English to establish himself as, I'm giving you my daughter, therefore you are like my son. I'm the father, but the English will be like a son-in-law. And so this is what he's trying to do when he gives Pocahontas as an alliance maker with English. And the English don't get it. So John Smith sees Powhatan as a formidable opponent, not as a possible father-in-law. And when John Smith is captured by the Powhatans, he's not actually captured, this is a ritual thing, and there's this marriage to Pocahontas, which is not actually a thing. John Smith writes about it as, oh, you know, I was going to be tortured, but then this young woman fell in love with me, and therefore, you know, I have a hold over the Powhatans because, you know, I have one of their princesses and she fell in love with me. When in fact the Powhatans were giving Pocahontas to the English to establish this alliance. It illustrates this sort of miscommunication. Herself, here is an image of Pocahontas on the left, of course the Disney version of Pocahontas. At the time of the story of this John Smith Pocahontas marriage, which is actually not a marriage, it's just an alliance, and she's sort of a liaison. Pocahontas is actually about 10 years old, and so it's not actually seen as a real marriage. What happens is the English capture Pocahontas. She ends up returning back to the Powhatans and becomes this alliance, and she ends up marrying an Englishman, not John Smith. And this image on the left is when she actually travels to England and meets the Queen, and there's a portrait of her done. She ends up giving birth to a son, and then she dies at the age of 22, and she's buried in England. So the story of Jamestown is one of a lot of hardship and a lot of miscommunication.